Hi guys, so we're thinking about quadrilaterals, four-sided polygons, right? So polygon has to have closed shape, right? It can't have anything open, right? If you tipped it over, it'd have to be able to roll. Has to have straight sides, right? And it has to have at least three, but specifically in a quadrilateral, it has to have four. No less, no more, only four. So there are different types of quadrilaterals, and they all have some things in common and then have some things that make them uniquely themselves. So when we think about a quadrilateral, they all have four sides, right? So it could be some longer, some shorter. They could all be the same. Their angles could all be the same. They could be different, right? It really depends on the type of quadrilateral. So within a square is the most specific type of quadrilateral that there is, right? In a square, we know that all four sides are exactly the same, even if my drawing doesn't look like it. But these hash marks, right? It tells you that they're all one hash mark long. So even if the picture looks to be more of a different shape, they all are the same. Or congruent. Congruent is a fancy math word for the same. Congruent sides, four congruent angles, but not just congruent, they're four right angles. So all of these angles are 90 degrees. And we also know that the opposite sides, so this side and this side are opposite, they're parallel. This side and this side are opposite and they're parallel. Parallel being like train tracks, they're never going to intersect no matter what. Rhombus is very similar actually to a square. Let's see what's slightly different. So it has four congruent sides, just like a square. Check. They both have that. Opposite angles are congruent and opposite sides are parallel. So we have this. Opposite sides are parallel, just like in a square. But in a rhombus, the opposite angles are congruent, are the same. So I might think of a rhombus being like a square after a windstorm. It's like it got tipped over, right? So all the sides are the same length, but the angles, these angles are the same. We'll call them angle blues, and angle greens are also the same. A rectangle is similar to a square and similar to a rhombus in that it has four right angles, just like a square. The opposite sides are congruent, right? They're the same. And opposite sides are parallel, just like in a rhombus and just like in a square. But the thing that's different, right, is that even though the opposite sides are the same, they're not all the same. So the two hash mark sides are the same length and the one hash mark sides are the same length. Angles are all 90 degrees. Okay, parallelogram. Opposite sides are congruent. Well, that sounds familiar, right? We have that in a rectangle. We have that in a rhombus. We have two pairs of parallel sides, and we have opposite angles being congruent. Well, that also sounds familiar, just like in a rhombus. So what makes a rhombus different than a parallelogram, or a parallelogram different than a square? Well, magically, I've drawn this here. So in a rhombus, it's like a square after a windstorm, right? All of the sides are still the same length. In a parallelogram, the red sides here are congruent, the same length, and the pink are congruent, they're the same length. They have two pairs of parallel sides, so the red lines will never intersect, same with the pink lines here. And the opposite angles are congruent. So we have these are the same, and we'll call these green angles are the same. A trapezoid is a little bit of the odd man out. A trapezoid is still part of team quadrilateral, but it only has one pair of parallel sides. It doesn't have all the sides being the same in terms of their length. It doesn't necessarily have, any pairs of um, uh, congruent angles. It can, it doesn't have to. The only thing it has to have is one pair of parallel sides, not two, not anymore, but just one. So a symbol you might see is this little arrow like this, and this can tell you that these two lines are parallel.